Hey guys, welcome back to MDCU News, and I was right. Not about Monica already having her powers, or even about Westview being a hyperlocation, but I was right about Pietro. Roll the clips. Tommy mentions fake Pietro. Dare I say Pietro for short?
Oh, I got close with fake Pietro, if you will, but no doubt.
Did you see that? A whole week prior to this episode airing, I came up with the name Pietro, and almost word for word, Agatha used the same name. And if that's not reason enough to subscribe to my channel, then I simply don't know what is. But with each new episode comes new opportunities to get 1 out of 30 guesses correct and then act like the other 29 never happened. So let's dive in. First off, this week's episode was only 44 minutes rather than the very heavily rumored 1 hour, which I hope we'll be getting next week. So it starts off with a flashback to Salem, Massachusetts, 1693, which of course coincides with the Salem witch trials. And I just love how this show has completely played with our expectations in such subtle ways. Because here we see the Salem witch trials and Agatha being taken away. So automatically our minds are like, okay, she's being burned for being discovered as a witch. But no, instead, she actually very casually says what she is. And the real crime and why she's getting killed or whatever they're doing to her is because of betrayal. And Agatha says that it wasn't her fault. They, who knows who that is, just bent to my will. And that's super important because it seems that Agatha has a very powerful ability to control people, which explains why she would be so fascinated by Wanda's effortless ability to constantly control an entire town. And from the way that Agnes drains the other women of their powers, we can guess that her end goal is to try and do the same thing to Wanda, in an effort to steal Wanda's clearly superior powers and to be able to control so many people just as effortlessly. Now, this opening scene was very different from the MCU status quo, and it surprised me because in Doctor Strange, who in the comics is like the pinnacle of magic, they explained his powers as
We harness energy drawn from other dimensions.
and this was to try and steer away from magic in order to be more accommodating for conservative viewers and countries that might not be too kind to that. But now Marvel seems to have no problem diving into magic. Or so it seems. Following the same logic Jane Foster used in Thor 1 of magic being science we don't understand, I'm guessing that Agatha, Wanda, and all these so-called witches are really mutants, born with a very special strand of the X gene that gives them all the same kind of powers. And because in 1693 the concept of genes wasn't even discovered, nonetheless mutations in genes, they simply slapped on the nearest title of witch to explain why these women had powers. And since we know the future of the MCU's is X-Men, it makes perfect sense for them to start easing in these characters that later can be retconned to have being mutants all along to make the transition seem a little more seamless. So, back in Agatha's little cave, Wanda is completely oblivious to the fundamentals of how to use this special mutant gene, something Agatha is so surprised of, because Agatha recognizes that Wanda is extremely powerful, but she wants to know how she does it so flawlessly, especially since she was never taught. So after reminding Wanda that she still has her kids stashed away somewhere, Agatha takes us all on a trip down memory lane of Wanda's life to find some answers. Our first stop takes us to Wanda's early childhood back in Sokovia. And if you look, her hair is not red, but instead dark brown. And after a little research, apparently over the course of one's life, the eumelanin gene, which is responsible for how dark someone's hair is, can turn off, causing the pheomelanin gene, which is responsible for how red our hair is, to turn on. And this shift in gene expression could be the perfect reflection of how Wanda's mutant genes activated and gave her powers, changing the rest of her genome in the process, causing her hair to turn red. And with each of these flashbacks, not only do we get a key history of the development of Wanda's powers, but we also see how sitcom TV has played a huge role in different parts of her life. This early period being the Dick Van Dyke Show, which explains why this was the first era of TV that we saw in episode 1. So once the bomb hits their home and never goes off, Wanda, not really understanding that she had powers all this time, says that it was all due to chance. But Agatha explains that Wanda really manipulated the probability, which is a great reference to Wanda's comic book powers, where she's often shown manipulating probability in different scenarios to her benefit. And of course, the ticking bomb was in fact reflected by the red blink of the toaster in the episode 1 commercial. So as we move into Wanda's time under the Von Strucker testing experiment, Agatha explains that yes, Wanda had these powers naturally, but she must have gotten a boost, which of course came from the Mind Stone, which at that time was hidden within the outer layer of Loki's scepter. And just from being in the same room with the stone, it automatically is pulled to her and cracks open, radiating its power onto Wanda and revealing the shadowy figure, which is the Scarlet Witch. And from Age of Ultron, specifically Tony and Thor's nightmare sequences, Wanda's telepathy not only showed you the worst that you feared, but it also gave you a hint into the future. Tony saw all the Avengers dead and Cap's shield broken, just like what happened in Endgame. And Thor saw the events of Ragnarok. So now we see Wanda really got this specific ability straight from the Mind Stone, because now it is also showing her future as the Scarlet Witch. Look again at the pointy headgear. This woman is Wanda in her comic accurate suit. Then after the testing, we see once again Wanda turn to sitcoms to help her cope. This time it looks like I Love Lucy. And Agatha, just like the rest of us, has a theory about what's going on, but needs more information before she realizes what Wanda really is. Then after the events of Age of Ultron, right before Civil War, Wanda is watching Malcolm in the Middle to avoid her grief over the loss of Pietro. And her and Vision start to bond, and it's so adorable to see awkward Vision, but also so sad that it even makes Agatha start to tear up. And again, I love how the showrunners have made so many parallels of the audience reflected into the show. Because as Agatha is urging Wanda to keep going, we're sitting in front of our screens yelling at the show to do the same thing, and it's beautiful. So then we skip to the events after Endgame, where Wanda is storming the sword facility, and just like I said in last week's breakdown, it was Hayward all along. He lured Wanda into the compound, because when she goes to Vision's body, she says that she couldn't feel him, an unfortunate parallel to Infinity War, when she said all she could feel was him. Well, no, when Vision said that about her. But either way, it wasn't her powers that brought her there. It was Hayward. And then with some fake news clip, he acted as if she broke in there herself when all she wanted to do was bury her robot boyfriend. But Hayward was so desperate to try and bring him back to life, and somehow she knew Wanda would be able to do that when she did it herself. And I'm not saying Hayward's Mephisto, but I'm saying he knows a little too much. So Wanda kind of says her goodbyes, and then she gets into her Buick, which is just so funny to me because here we have arguably one of the most powerful beings in the universe, and she's driving a Buick, which she uses to drive into Westview, the town where Vision bought a piece of land for them to build a house and grow old in, which is extremely depressing. And if you look at the bottom left of the certificate, it's labeled for Wanda Maximoff and the Vision. So technically, Vision is his last name, and his first name is The. And I'm not sure how to feel about this, but we definitely see how Wanda feels. After a lifetime of grief, she finally snaps, releasing this tinted dark red energy, which Agatha later labels as chaos energy, and Wanda, through her grief, uses it not only to create their home, but to completely transform all of Westview into her ideal reality. And as you see this happening, the red energy transforms into a yellow energy, likely tapping into the power she got from the Mind Stone, and completely remakes Vision from scratch. And now, with all the puzzle pieces, Agatha puts it all together and recognizes that Wanda is the real-life myth of the Scarlet Witch, this uber powerful being that can defy physics and create something out of nothing. And the fact that Wanda has been using this insanely powerful ability to make breakfast for dinner aggravates Agnes because, of course, she has much more nefarious plans for these powers. And she tells Wanda that she's been using chaos energy and is therefore the Scarlet Witch. So now that Agatha knows that it was grief which triggered Wanda's massive use of chaos energy, she has Billy and Tommy tied up. And based on what we saw in the opening scene, I'm guessing it's Agatha's plan to kill Billy and Tommy right in front of Wanda, triggering a massive release of chaos energy that Agatha is going to try to harness just like she drained the other women of their powers. This episode was insane and gave us a lot of answers, but also a lot more questions. So I'm definitely feeling that next week's episode will be at least an hour-long conclusion where Wanda fully goes into her identity as the Scarlet Witch, easily defeating Agatha and becoming the villain herself. And since Agatha was able to sense the amount of power coming from the Hex, that means Doctor Strange must have been able to as well. So I'm guessing that him showing up next week, who I guess is a mystery character, is not going to be like, oh, I heard there's something happening, so here I am now. He must have been secretly surveying the situation and coming up with a plan that he's going to reveal next week. And from the post-credit scene, Hayward was able to repower Vision. We see that Agatha is not only going to be the only threat that Monica, Strange, and Wanda are going to have to deal with. So that's all for today, folks. And as always, if you didn't absolutely hate this content, it would be much appreciated if you dropped a like and a comment saying what you think we should expect for next week's episode. As always, peace out, folks.